Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you may be watching this. This is the Grad Connection. I'm Jamie Moeller, and the whole purpose here is to try to help graduate students thrive rather than just survive. So, up to this point, most of the topics that I've been presenting are kind of generic. They probably could apply to anyone. Today, what I want to do is get very practical and focus on something that is really aimed at graduate students. This is a professional development workshop that I have historically offered at Purdue, but I think it would be helpful to everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and provide it, and I'll just let you be the judge of it. So the whole point of this is graduating on time. I think it's a challenge for graduate students to graduate on time for a variety of reasons. Uh, so I would say probably the very first reason is most graduate students don't graduate on time because they don't plan to graduate on time. They don't create any plan. And to me, that's one of the biggest challenges. Is I think a lot of people come straight from an undergraduate realm where a lot of times there may be professional advisors. I think the plans are much more lockstep at an undergraduate level. There's less variability. Many graduate plans are very open-ended and there's lots of configurations for them. And so it becomes a particular challenge when you don't create a plan coming in the door. Now, if you have a really good advisor, a really good chair, they will set you down and they'll try to create a semester by semester plan, at least what would be an ideal plan. But I would say it is really honestly, the system will not ensure that you graduate on time. Matter of fact, I would say it's a conflict of interest to think that it would. Because a lot of faculty, I mean, once they start working with the graduate students, to their benefit if those graduate students continue to work with them ad nauseum, publishing papers, doing grants, and all those kinds of things. Now, I'm not saying that every graduate advisor is like that, but you have to admit that there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there because, once a graduate student and a faculty member start working together, and things are going well, getting grants, doing papers, there's not a lot of impetus for them to actually help you get graduated. Now, I'm not saying that they do that on purpose. But again, just trusting the system will not ensure you graduate on time. Right along with that, I would say that the plan of study that you create is supposed to be a plan. But what I've observed a lot of times is that it ends up being a record of courses taken rather than something that has been planned out ahead of time. Now, I realize as a graduate student, you create a plan ahead of time. Oftentimes, graduate course offerings may change, stuff shifts around, and I understand you may have to make some changes. But in general, I would hope that you would be able to plan out at least 60 to 75% of it that would stick and you wouldn't have to punt on it or modify or change it. So key is sitting down and creating a plan from the beginning. And before this video is over, I'm going to give you a tool that hopefully will help you. And I'll also offer myself as someone who can try to help you do that. Be proactive. Nobody's going to care more for you than you will, right, for yourself. And so, again, believing that, just trusting the system and trusting that things don't just work out. People work things out. And sometimes it's difficult to figure out some of the logistics and the contingencies. But what I can promise you is if you have no plan, you're sure to hit it. And I think that's why a lot of times there are a lot of graduate students that kind of float around and they just fumble. Now, not always is it their fault. Sometimes it's poor guidance. Sometimes it's policy, process, or politics. But nevertheless, you can take on as much ownership of that of your basically your life as you want. So what are some tactics? First of all, I'm going to provide a plan of study template, it's just a very simple spreadsheet that you sit down and you write out a kind of a plan. But aside from that, knowing your department's policies and procedures is critical. Hopefully, your advisor knows some of them. Likely, they will not know all of them. Faculty focus on so many different things, from undergraduate teaching to working with graduate students to research to service and engagement, other kinds of things. I mean, essentially, the working with graduate students may only be a third of what they're expected to do by the university or by their unit. So, uh, you know, hopefully they can point you out sources, but don't just think that everyone else is going to plan your life for you. You need to take control of that. To me, that's part of the graduate experience is trying to navigate it. Now, certainly people like myself and other faculty are there to help you, but you have to take some of that on yourself. Knowing your chair or your advisor's plan, kind of knowing what kind of, I usually say that there are really two kinds of graduate advisors. There are graduate faculty who, when they're working with graduate students, will say, okay, if you're going to work with me, if I'm going to provide an assistantship for you, an assistantship covers for your biggest thing you get out of it is typically a remission of your tuition, meaning you don't have to pay anything or pay very little, you also get a stipend. And it's usually reasonable. It's not designed as a long-term, make a lot of money kind of thing. It's designed to tide you over. But nevertheless, there are two types of advisor. One advisor will say, this is what you are going to do your research on if you're going to work with me. Or a second type of advisor would be the advisor who says, okay, what do you want to do? And usually faculty are going to fall in one of those two camps for a variety of reasons. You really need to know which of those camps your advisor falls in. And usually that's a conversation that occur early on. If not early on, at some point you need to have that conversation so you know where you're going. Next would be choosing the courses and the faculty that you're going to work with in your studies. Choosing courses can be difficult at the graduate level because oftentimes, because they're small class sizes, because there are changes in schedule, sometimes courses won't be offered on a cycle that helps a student make progress. Sometimes you'll plan on wanting to take this course and it doesn't end up being offered. You might want to take a course in the summer and it just hasn't happened. So you have a lot of logistics, but you should be able to plan out 60 to 75% of the courses that you're taking, and then create the ideal plan, and then you shift as life throws things at you. So creating courses, and then as far as faculty, figuring out the faculty that you want in your committee is also an important thing. I'd encourage you to work with your advisor. I mean, if your advisor a lot of times people won't say, well, hey, you don't want to work with so-and-so. They don't typically say that. But instead, they'll have no comment about that person, or they won't talk about that person. So when your faculty advisor gives you recommendations for people to serve on your committee, you really probably need to listen to that, because a lot of times there's experience behind that. Then the last thing before I'll talk about the timeline is, I mean, you really need to set yourself up, whether you're a master's student, PhD student, I don't care where you are in the process. If you are doing a thesis or a dissertation, if you are doing a researched MS or a dissertation, a research doctorate, I should say, just know that you're going to encounter something called the neutral zone. And we experience neutral zones all of our life. And this comes from a book called Transitions by William Bridges. I'll put a reference to it in the notes here. But we all go through neutral zone experiences when we shift from one part of our life to another part of it. It's usually during major shifts in our life. It could be the death of someone in our family. It could be the loss of a job and taking over. It's usually some kind of major life shift. And it's not just something changing. It's something that's a major emotional, psychological shift. I will tell you, as a graduate student, you will experience that when you shift from the point of taking courses into working in your research. You will be in what's called the neutral zone. We all hate the neutral zone. We often all want to speed up the neutral zone. We want to skip past it. But it's a natural part of life. It's part of the transition from something else ending or something dying to something new, and whatever that new normal is going to be. It is an uncomfortable time. Quite honestly, it sucks because it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You don't know if you're making progress. You really you lose your bearings. You kind of feel disoriented in lots of different ways. But just realize every graduate student goes through this, particularly when they're working on their research. So just know that ahead of time. Know you're going to encounter that. Know that you're going to say, why the heck did I ever choose to do this? You will have that thought. I promise you. Almost every graduate student I know of, including myself, has done that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about a timeline. So I want to throw some stuff out here. Maybe you're familiar with graduate studies. You know how all this works. Maybe you can skip past this part if not. But I want to quickly say this is kind of the structure of how things look. So for a master's degree with a thesis, it's typically 30 credit hours, and it usually takes 2 years. You may be able to crunch it down to a year and a half if you throw some summer in there. If you're doing a non-thesis, that is a coursework only type of master's degree, you may be able to do it quicker, but it's still usually about 30 credit hours. The difference is with an MS thesis, a certain part of those 30 credits are for the thesis or research work, as opposed to if you're doing a coursework only master's degree, it's all just going to be courses. So that's the master's degree. PhD, there's 2 flavors, and this is I call it either a direct, which is a common term, or I call it an MS plus. And the difference is, with a direct to PhD, you're going straight from a bachelor's degree into a PhD degree. It requires 90 credit hours above the bachelor's degree, and it typically takes 6 years. The 90 credits, there's some mix of research and credit and course credits, but it varies. With the MS plus PhD degree, the assumption here is you're coming out of a master's degree into a PhD, which means you're carrying over typically 30 credit hours from a master's, which means you need 60 credit hours to equal 90, but it only takes you 4 years, right? So that's kind of the degree structure in most cases. Now, there are other kinds of doctorates and stuff. I'm not talking about that here. There's too many variances there for me to talk about anything that would be consistent in any way. But this just to give you a wet finger in the wind kind of approach to what this looks like. Now, here's kind of what it looks like. And you may, I don't know, you may have to come back and freeze this frame and take a look at it. You may want to capture it. All of these degrees, whichever one you're talking about, they all include a plan of study. That is the plan of the courses you're going to take and the research you're going to do. The courses, the actual courses you're going to take, a proposal defense for your research, whether it be thesis or dissertation. Honestly, the only difference between a thesis and a PhD dissertation is scope in size. Generally, they're both trying to create new knowledge and or apply it in some way, right? So that's really the only difference between a master's degree and a PhD is scope or size. So they all three, they take a proposal defense. They all three have a research period, and then they all have some kind of final defense that you present. With a master's degree, with a thesis, as I said, it's 2 years. So typically you have a year to a year and a half of courses. You have a proposal. You have research that's a year to a half a year, depending on your courses, and a final defense, right? So in general, you it typically adds up to be 2 years. Like I said, you could go down to a year and a half. A lot of people do 2.5 years, but in general, it's 2 years. Then there's two types of PhDs, as I said. Here's a direct PhD down here in the corner. Essentially, it's a 6-year period. It's essentially, if you can imagine the MS plus a PhD, that's kind of what it is, right? So in a direct PhD, you have a year and a half of courses. You have something called a qualifying exam in most cases. If you pass that qualifying exam, you go on in the degree. If you don't pass that exam, then you exit with a master's degree. And usually those kinds of master's degrees are considered like a consolation prize. And I mean, no offense to people who have a master's degree, because I have one. It's just that's how those kinds of degrees work. It's usually the MS and those kinds of programs are not a desirable degree to have per se. I mean, the PhD needs to be the end goal. Other programs, you may stop at an MS, and that's totally acceptable. It just depends on the discipline and the where you are or what profession you're in or whatever. So if you pass your qualifiers, and those are usually written exams, but it varies per institution, then you take some more courses. You do a preliminary examination. Which is basically a question that varies as well. So let me just park that. But it's basically an oral and a written exam. Then you do, and I didn't put it on there, you do a proposal, you do your research, you do final defense, right? The MS plus PhD is a PhD degree in which you come in with a master's degree in hand. Therefore, it's only 4 years. You're carrying 30 degrees over from your master's degree. Essentially, in it, you do courses for 2 or 3 years. You do your preliminary exam. You do a proposal. You do your research and your final defense, and you're out the door. So this is kind of the structure, and I know this is quick and it's kind of quick and dirty, but I provide this because a lot of times what I've found is students don't graduate on time because they don't plan to graduate on time. And so let me end with this last thing. Here's this little template that I put together. It's just a simple file in Excel. The way it's designed, there are basically 3 tabs. There's an MS tab, there's an MS Plus tab, and there's a Direct to PhD tab. Essentially, the idea here is that you would treat each one of these blocks as a semester, including, so summer would count as a semester. And so what you would do if you were using this to plan, you would enter what year it is and what session, like summer, fall, spring. You would enter the courses that you're going to take, how many credits they are you taking any research that semester? And then there are these demarcations of plan of study, and at Purdue, EPOS stands for Electronic Plan of Study, so that's what EPOS is. So that's your plan of study. Proposal and final defense. And so in a particular semester, if you're going to do one of those major milestones, you would put it down here in the box. And so essentially by filling this in, even if some of it's going to shift around a little, at least you have a target that you're shooting for. What's bad is when a student comes in working on a graduate degree and they just go from semester to semester with no major plan. They just kind of take whatever comes next, as opposed to sitting down and creating a plan. And so this tool is intended to try to help you do that. This Excel file I will reference in the show notes for this video. And so that pretty much brings us to a close of what I wanted to share today. I know this is very specific to graduate students. I've kind of got past, and I assume, I at least right now, I'm planning on the next several weeks of doing these to be focused on like tactical, very strategic, very specific graduate-oriented stuff. If I chase a rabbit or two, hopefully you'll give me some grace and understand it just seems to be, that may be what's on my heart at that particular day. But I want to provide some practical content. Hopefully you found this useful. Again, this is the Grad Connection. I'm Jamie Moeller. Hopefully, you're finding this content useful. I know various people have commented at various times. I am seeing, a modest amount of traffic, traffic enough that tells me that people are looking at this, are using it, and finding it useful. And I would just offer to you, particularly if you're at Purdue and you need some help laying out a plan for your graduate studies, I'm more willing to do that. I can do that to some degree with other folks from other universities. The challenge is I don't know all the policies and procedures at other institutions, so it can be more harrowing or more difficult, I should say, at those institutions. But nevertheless, hopefully you find this content useful. Hope you're having a great day, great week, and I'll see you next time.